My child, before you go any further, I need you to sit with this for a moment. Somewhere, right now, there is a version of your story where the person meant for you turned around and left. Where the door closed. Where the silence became permanent. But that is not the story you are about to hear. This is the story of the moment before that door closed forever, and the small, strange, almost invisible thing that stopped it from happening. You may not believe in timing yet. You may not believe that the universe pays attention to the details of a single afternoon, a single sentence, a single decision made in the space of 3 seconds. But by the time this ends, you might understand why some people say that love isn't found, it's rescued, again and again, from the very edge of loss. This is not a story about perfect people. It is not a fairy tale where two hearts glide effortlessly toward each other. It is messier than that. It is more human than that. It begins, as most real love stories do, with two people who were both convinced they were about to walk away, and one of them almost did. Picture it. A late afternoon, the kind where the light turns gold too early, as if the day itself is trying to say something before it runs out of time. There is a person standing near a doorway, keys already in hand, coat already on, heart already made up. Somewhere else, blocks away, or maybe just rooms away, another person is staring at a phone that refuses to light up. Two people, orbiting the same ending, unaware that the ending was about to be interrupted. You might be tempted to think you already know how this goes. A grand gesture. A sprint through an airport. A rehearsed speech delivered just in time. But real life rarely writes itself so neatly, and this story is stranger, quieter, and far more believable than anything scripted. What actually happened that day did not look like love at all. At first, it looked like nothing. Let's go back further, because to understand how close it came to ending, you first have to understand how it began, and how something that starts so gently can still end up standing at the edge of goodbye. They met the way most meaningful things happen, without announcement. No thunderclap, no swelling music, just an ordinary Tuesday that quietly became the hinge on which two lives would turn. A shared table at a crowded coffee shop because every other seat was taken. A borrowed pen. A comment about the weather that neither of them really meant, the kind of small talk that exists only to test whether a conversation is worth having. It was worth having. That much became clear within the first 10 minutes, though neither of them said so out loud. There was a particular kind of ease between them. The sort that doesn't announce itself as important, but somehow makes an hour disappear without either person noticing. They talked about nothing significant. A book left unfinished. A city one of them had visited and the other longed to see. And yet underneath the nothing, something significant was happening. Two nervous systems recognizing each other. Two people quietly deciding, without deciding, that they wanted to know more. For a while, it was easy. Isn't that always how it starts? The early weeks have a kind of gravity-defying lightness, where every text feels like a small event, every plan feels inevitable, every disagreement feels laughably small. You give people the best version of yourself in the beginning, and they do the same for you, and for a while, that's enough to make it feel like nothing could ever go wrong. But nothing stays weightless forever. Life has a way of adding pressure exactly where two people are least prepared for it, a stressful year at work, an old wound reopened by something as small as a forgotten reply, a family situation that pulled attention in directions neither of them expected. Slowly, the ease that once defined them began to develop cracks. Not dramatic ones. Just small fault lines, the kind that don't seem dangerous until you realize how deep they've gone. They stopped noticing each other the way they once had. Conversations shortened. Assumptions replaced curiosity. And in the quiet in-between spaces, the car rides, the late nights, the moments right before sleep, both of them separately began asking the same unspoken question. Is this still working, or are we simply used to each other now? That question is more dangerous than any argument. Arguments can be resolved. But quiet doubt, left unspoken, grows roots in the dark. And by the time either of them was honest enough to name what they were feeling, the distance between them had already become its own kind of language, one made entirely of things unsaid. If you've ever felt that particular kind of loneliness, being physically close to someone while feeling emotionally continents apart, then you already understand what came next. Because the next part of this story is the part where one of them decided they couldn't keep pretending the distance wasn't there. But that was only the beginning of what would become the hardest week of their relationship, and possibly, though neither of them knew it yet, the most important one. By the time the tension reached its peak, it didn't erupt in some explosive confrontation. It arrived quietly, the way most true endings do, not with shouting, but with a kind of exhausted honesty. One evening, after another conversation that circled the same unresolved hurt without ever landing anywhere new, one of them finally said the sentence that had been building for weeks, "Maybe we want different things now." There is a particular kind of silence that follows a sentence like that. It isn't peaceful. It's the silence of two people staring at the same fear from opposite sides. Neither of them wanted to be the one to say it first, and yet once it was said, it couldn't be unsaid. Something had shifted. The relationship, which had once felt like solid ground, suddenly felt like something either of them could simply step off of. In the days that followed, the distance became almost physical. Fewer calls. Shorter replies. The kind of politeness that exists specifically to avoid vulnerability. If you've ever watched a relationship enter its final stretch, you know this phase, the strange calm before someone finally decides to leave. It isn't dramatic. It's almost peaceful, in a haunting way, like the stillness before a storm that everyone can sense but no one wants to name. One of them began preparing, quietly, to let go. Not out of cruelty, but out of self-protection. The very human instinct to leave before you can be left, to close the door yourself so it can't be slammed shut on you. Boxes weren't packed. Nothing so obvious. But mentally, emotionally, the exit had already been drafted. A future without the other person had already begun to take shape, tentative and uncertain, but real. And the other person could feel it happening. There is a particular ache in sensing someone pulling away before they've said a single word about it. Watching the slow withdrawal, the shortened conversations, the eyes that no longer linger the way they used to. It is one of the loneliest feelings a person can carry, because it forces you to grieve something that technically hasn't ended yet. Here is where the story could have gone the way so many stories quietly do, two people drifting apart, convincing themselves it was inevitable, filing the relationship away as one more thing that simply didn't work out. Most love stories that fail don't fail because of one dramatic betrayal. They fail in exactly this way, slowly, silently, through 1,000 small withdrawals that neither person had the courage to name in time. But something small, something almost too ordinary to matter, was about to interrupt that ending. And the strange part is that neither of them saw it coming, because it didn't look like fate. It looked like an accident. Few people could have imagined what came next, because it began not with a decision, but with a mistake. On the day everything nearly ended for good, one of them had finally made peace with leaving. Bags weren't packed, but the decision had settled into something firmer than before, a quiet resolve to have one last conversation and then step away for good. The kind of decision made not in anger, but in exhaustion, the kind that comes after weeks of hoping something will change and slowly realizing it might not. That same afternoon, the other person had reached their own version of the same conclusion. Independently. Without either of them knowing, the other had arrived at the same painful clarity. Two people, walking toward the same ending from two different directions, both convinced they were protecting themselves from further hurt. The plan was simple. A short conversation. A mutual, quiet release. No blame, no cruelty, just an acknowledgement that whatever they had built together had reached its natural end. It is, in some ways, the most mature way two people can part. And it very nearly happened exactly that way. But timing has a strange sense of humor. On the way to that conversation, something interrupted the plan, something so small it would have been forgettable under any other circumstances. A phone, left behind in the rush of preparing to leave. A notification that lit up the screen at the exact wrong, or exact right, moment. Not a message meant to be seen by anyone else. A private note, written not to be read, but simply to be released. The kind of thing people write in moments of raw honesty, never intending for another set of eyes to find it. It was found anyway. Not through snooping. Not through betrayal. Simply through the collision of two people's timing, one leaving a room too quickly, one entering it too soon after. And in that unplanned, unintended overlap, something was revealed that neither of them had said out loud in weeks. That beneath the exhaustion, beneath the distance, beneath the careful resolve to walk away, there was still something aching to be held on to. The words on that screen weren't dramatic. They weren't a plea or a confession written for effect. They were simply true, an admission, written in private, of a fear that had been driving the distance all along. Not a fear of the relationship. A fear of losing it. A fear so large that it had disguised itself as indifference, because indifference felt safer than admitting how much it would hurt to lose this. Reading those words changed something instantly. Not because they revealed a secret, but because they revealed a mirror, the exact same fear, worded almost identically, that the other person had been carrying in silence too. The truth was far more surprising than either of them expected. They hadn't been drifting apart because they wanted different things. They had been drifting apart because they were both terrified of wanting the same thing too much, and neither of them knew how to say so without feeling exposed. Isn't it strange how fear can wear the mask of indifference so convincingly that even the person feeling it can be fooled? If you've ever pulled away from someone you actually longed to stay close to, simply because staying felt too vulnerable. You already understand exactly what was happening inside both of them that week. That single, accidental discovery didn't fix everything instantly. Real stories rarely resolve that fast. But it did something more important than fixing things. It interrupted the momentum toward goodbye long enough for both of them to ask a different question. Not, should we end this, but what if we've been afraid of the wrong thing all along? And that question changed the entire direction of what happened next. What happened in the hours that followed was not a movie moment. There was no music swelling, no perfectly timed embrace. It was quieter than that, and somehow more powerful because of it. The planned conversation still happened. But it became a different conversation than either of them had prepared for. Instead of carefully worded closure, there were long pauses. Instead of polite acknowledgement, there was, for the first time in weeks, real honesty, the kind that trembles a little on its way out because it isn't sure how it will be received. One of them admitted, haltingly, that the distance hadn't come from stopped caring, but from caring so much that the possibility of losing it had become unbearable to sit with. The other admitted something almost identical, that the silence had never been coldness, but a kind of self-protection dressed up to look like readiness to leave. There is something profoundly humbling about discovering that the person you were prepared to lose was carrying the exact same private terror you were. It doesn't undo the pain of the weeks before. It doesn't erase the very real ache of feeling unseen. But it reframes it. Suddenly, the distance wasn't proof that the connection had died. It was proof of how much both of them had been trying, badly and quietly, to survive the fear of losing something they never stopped valuing. If you have ever mistaken someone's fear for indifference, your own, or someone else's, pause here for a moment and ask yourself honestly. How many endings in your own life might have been misunderstandings wearing the costume of certainty? You don't have to answer out loud. But it might be worth sitting with. In the days that followed that conversation, something shifted between them that was different from the early ease of the beginning. It wasn't the effortless lightness of new love. It was something sturdier. An intentional kind of closeness, built by two people who had come close enough to losing each other to stop taking the relationship for granted. They didn't pretend the hard weeks hadn't happened. They talked about them, slowly, over the following months, revisiting the moments where silence had done more damage than honesty ever could have. They built, almost from scratch, a new habit of saying the uncomfortable thing before it had time to calcify into distance. It wasn't dramatic work. It was small, daily, unglamorous work, the kind that never makes it into movies, but is exactly the kind of work that makes love last past the point where it would otherwise quietly end. Before we get to how their story settled into something lasting, I want to ask you something, because this is the kind of question worth sitting with rather than scrolling past. Has there ever been a moment in your own life, with someone you loved, or almost loved, where you mistook fear for an ending? Where distance felt final, but was really just two people protecting themselves from a hurt that hadn't even happened yet? If a moment like that comes to mind, you might already know exactly why this story feels familiar. It would be easy to end this story here, with the relief of a near miss avoided. But the most meaningful part of what happened isn't the accidental discovery that stopped them from parting ways. It's what they built afterward, deliberately, with open eyes, knowing exactly how close they had come to losing it. A year later, the relationship looked different from how it began, not because the spark had faded, but because it had matured into something less fragile. They learned to name fear out loud instead of letting it disguise itself as distance. They learned that closeness isn't the absence of hard weeks, but the willingness to stay honest through them. And they learned, perhaps most importantly, that almost losing something can either destroy it completely, or it can teach two people exactly how to hold on to it more carefully than before. There's a quiet kind of wisdom in stories like this one, and it isn't really about soulmates or fate or perfectly timed accidents. It's about the fact that connection, real connection, is rarely lost through lack of love. It's lost through silence. Through two people quietly assuming the worst about each other's distance instead of asking, gently, what's actually happening underneath it. If this story stirred something in you, I'd love to know. In the comments, tell me about a moment where honesty, yours or someone else's, pulled a relationship back from the edge it seemed destined to fall over. Sometimes hearing how close other people came to losing what mattered most is exactly the reminder we need to hold on a little more carefully to what we have. Wherever you are in your own story right now, whether you're holding on to something worth fighting for, healing from something that didn't survive, or simply hoping that someone out there is walking toward you the way these two people eventually walked back toward each other, I hope this reminded you of something important. It is rarely too late to say the honest thing. It is rarely too late to ask the real question instead of assuming the worst. And sometimes, the moment right before an ending is not actually the ending at all. Sometimes, it's simply the last chance for the truth to arrive in time. If stories like this one mean something to you, consider staying a little longer in this space. Subscribe, so you don't miss the next story, because there is always another moment out there, waiting quietly to be understood, and I would love for you to hear it with me.